With the release of The Rise of Skywalker late last year, the story arc that began in 1977 with A New Hope and birthed a billion-dollar franchise ended. Nearly 43 years in the making, the Skywalker saga has transcended the realm of film and ingrained itself firmly in popular culture. But the series finale, that should have ended with a bang to rival the combined explosion of each defensively compromised Death Star, closed with a disappointing fizz, alienating much of the Star Wars fanbase in the process. Now that the critics have had their say, the scores have been tallied, and the space dust has settled, perhaps it's time to ask, what went so wrong with the latest trilogy? To address this question, it is probably useful to first highlight what went right with The Force Awakens. In hindsight, The Force Awakens benefited hugely from the momentum gained throughout the build-up to its release. It had a clever marketing campaign that focused on the new characters that would be introduced, played by relatively unknown actors alongside the original cast. Upon release, The Force Awakens felt fresh whilst preserving the spirit of the original films. The new characters Rey and Finn were interesting, and they had a unified aim which could be boiled down to evade and capture by Kylo Ren and the First Order, and finding the whereabouts of Luke Skywalker. As such, the plot was sharp and succinct, with a powerful cliffhanger ending. The film ended up being a massive success that dominated at the box office and satisfied fans and casuals alike. One of the main criticisms, however, was that it was too similar in structure to A New Hope. This was a valid criticism, as there were many similarities. But keeping things familiar was also a sensible ploy by the creators, since making big changes early on would have been risky. As the millions rolled in, it seemed like the formula had worked. And so they took that opportunity with the sequel film, The Last Jedi. Except they also completely abandoned the basics of decent storytelling in the process. The Last Jedi ended up being a mess of a film, with the creative reins being taken over by Rian Johnson, a director best known for making unconventional movies. It seemed with The Last Jedi, Johnson was more preoccupied with putting his own contrived stamp on the story than preserving the feel and direction of what makes the Star Wars series great. This was a massive mistake, because after all, Star Wars is at its heart an archetypal story about good and evil. You start messing around with the archetypes, and you mess around with the essential DNA of the films themselves. And this is exactly what Johnson did, upturning the foundations of storytelling purely for the shock factor. For example, in order to have characters that embody the archetype of goodness, you need to have a contrasting example of a character that embodies the evil archetype. In the first trilogy, Darth Vader was obviously the character who you could clearly point to as the baddie. He was mysterious, scary, and insanely powerful. Think back to The Empire Strikes Back, which had built up towards the inevitable confrontation between Luke and Vader. Luke had undergone months of training in isolation with Yoda, and still gets his arse handed to him. All the while, Vader is actually toying with him. Luke gets his hand chopped clean off, and only just manages to escape by the nearest of margins. It was a brilliant piece of script writing to have a hero beaten so badly, because it made the threat and power of the dark side all the more real, and of course made Luke's development and triumph in Return of the Jedi all the more meaningful. Compare that to Vader's equivalent in Kylo Ren, who in The Last Jedi turns out to be not only a confused and whiny wet handkerchief, but gets thwarted again and again by Rey. Snoke, Kylo's superior, who had been pulling the strings of the First Order, also offers no challenge and gets beaten within seconds. Even though you get the impression Johnson thought he was being clever, he wasn't, and as a result the whole momentum of the story was lost. The Last Jedi's second sin was in its treatment of Luke's character. Mark Hamill was dropping hints throughout the build-up to the film that he was unhappy with Luke's arc, and it's easy to agree.
I remember one thing that was very informative to me, because I would say like, but we really have to think of what the audience expects and what they want. And he says, no, we have to do the opposite. We have to give them something they don't expect that we want.
When it came down to the crucial reveal as to why Luke has turned out the way he has, pedantic, childish, and a far cry from the self-assured and heroic Jedi that brought down the Empire, it just doesn't fit. He explains to Rey that he trained Kylo, but had a vision that Kylo would turn to the dark side, so tries to execute him? Kylo then destroys Luke's Jedi Order in revenge, and Luke exiles himself as a result of his guilt. Luke, the character who managed to see the good in Darth Vader of all people, suddenly decides that a mere vision of someone going awry is the reason enough to kill Kylo. I'm sorry, but no. Luke almost becomes a meme, kooky and cracked from living in isolation on an island with alien frog nuns? And the less said about space cows the better. Elsewhere, other characters like Poe and Finn are sidelined and reduced to a double act in order to crowbar comedy into scenes where it has little place. Despite performing decently enough at the box office, the numbers were significantly down on those gained by Awakens, and as a wide swathe of hardcore fans voiced their disapproval, threatening to boycott Disney and even going as far as to say Star Wars had been destroyed, the creators had to go back to the drawing board. By the time the Rise of Skywalker had come around, it seemed like an exercise in damage limitation. J.J. Abrams was brought back in to salvage the trilogy, though at this point for a lot of fans it was too late. Rise again had too much to do and didn't convince by bringing back Palpatine as a way to re-establish the threat so severely lacking from the previous film. Again, the film was in a rush to close all the flailing strands, not least that of Rey's past and Kylo's destiny. The huge reveal that Rey turns out to be the granddaughter of Palpatine just isn't given enough credence or screen time. Likewise, Kylo's change of heart at the 11th hour is too hasty, the effect being that both plot points have been tacked on in order to wrap things up. If there is one moment that sums up the film's absolutely mangled direction, it's the kiss between the two. It came out of nowhere, was unnecessary, and was a painfully obvious indication that the script hadn't fully fleshed out the relationship between these integral characters. So what of the future of the franchise? It's telling that despite all of the technology at the disposal of today's current filmmakers, the original trilogy still holds its place as the benchmark for the Star Wars brand. It's clear that in order to return to such a standard, the issues around scripts will have to be addressed. If anything, the series could perhaps aim to regain that level of darkness that was present in the original films too, even in terms of how the films looked. The contrast between light and dark in the cinematography of Empire in particular was used to great effect, especially in the lightsaber duel between Luke and Vader. A major shortfall of the current franchise, and which was the case in the prequel trilogy too, is the lack of darkness, which makes the imagery much less striking and gives an almost toy-like, tacky palette. Imagine what a filmmaker like Denis Villeneuve, who is unafraid to use contrast between light and dark, could do with a Star Wars film. Whatever happens, and despite the disappointment with the latest films, the Star Wars franchise is not done for by any means. It will continue to run, discussions will continue to rage, and the universe will continue to expand and evolve. You just hope that the creators take stock of their mistakes, so that the next time we visit a galaxy far, far away, we don't want the films to stay there. Thanks for listening, guys. What did you think to the latest trilogy? Let me know in the comment section below, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Join me next time for some more Front Row Movies.